Today I want to continue my Waggler fishing series by talking about a tip that I picked up from a book, which is that fantastic book by Jim Baxter, The Rising Antenna, which is still in print at the time of me talking about this, which is February 2023. Go to calmproductions.com. And what Jim explained was that he had devised a way of fishing with a waggler that involved using pole elastic. He said what you did was you took some number 4 elastic, that's what this is, number 4, and you made a short link of about 4 to 6 inches of number 4 elastic. And bear in mind this is for fishing with 2-pound line, and I've got a waggler here set up, and then there's a little link there, and this would be set some way below the float. I've stored this float with the shot on it and it's right up against it, but when I would rig it up I'd put through 18 inches of line or so I can adjust the depth of the float without having to worry about the elastic being in the way. And this elastic sits below the float going down to the hook. To the other end of the elastic, what Jim said was you might use, say, 2-pound Maxima as your main line, and you would then use a finer line. I've been using, this was a cheap line I got a while ago called Sintra 2-pound line, but it's definitely finer than Maxima, which is more like 0.15, fairly light line. And then you put a length of that down to the loop for your hook link, which might be even finer, 0.10 or 0.09, and you put fairly fine shot down the line of sort of number 8s, number 10s and so on. I decided to do some testing. The first thing I did, I made one of these loops 4 inches long, and I went to my garage and I tied some strong line to each end of the elastic. The bottom piece I anchored it onto something, and then the top bit I put a second loop on it and hooked in a set of scales, made sure they were zeroed, and I just pulled. I wanted to know how strong this number 4 elastic was, what its breaking strain was, and it will stretch. As we can see here, that 4 inches is well over a foot long, so there's quite a bit of stretch there, and there's still a bit there. And the breaking strain was pretty much exactly 2 pounds, and number 4 elastic will vary a little bit, and some elastic is sort of 4 to 6 or 3 to 4, whatever. But for this general light fishing with a small hook, a 20 or a 22, number 4 is about right. Jim advocates a thicker elastic if you were going to fish a bit heavier, maybe a number 6. And I think if you were fishing really fine, sort of 8-ounce hook lengths and 1.5 pound main line, and you could go to sort of 0.10 down below the elastic, you might well try even a number 2 or a 3 elastic. These are pretty fine compared to what people use for most pole fishing nowadays, where they're expecting carp and they're using puller bungs and things like that. So what advantage does this give? What it does is it's a little cushion, so when you strike there's that little bit of give. It's not going out to full stretch on the strike, it's just a little bit, and just make it less likely that you bump fish. Jim had also picked up the tip about the finer line from a book, an Ivan Marks book, Ivan Marks the People's Champion, which was about a quarter of all of his Angling Times articles that ran from about 1972 to 1980. This one was also Calm Productions. This one's out of print, quite hard to get hold of now. My own book on Ivan, which I'm just going to mention, Ivan Marks and the Likely Lads, is still in print from Calm Productions. However, going back to this book, Ivan, in an article going back probably nearly 50 years, talked about having this finer line. So he would say fishing a big waggler with a 3 pound main line, probably Maxima or Bell as it was used back then. And then below the float, he would have 5 foot of a 1.5 pound line to give that finesse below the float. So the strong line went to the heavy float that might take 3 swan shot, locking shot, and then the finer line below for fishing on the drop. So that concept, Jim had picked up on that in his book and tried it out. And it's obvious Jim has used this elastic a great deal. So the only way to test this for myself was to give it a go. Like I say, I've tested the elastic, I've got the break-in strain, and I've had a couple of sessions on the Waggler using this same Waggler on a local still water, and in one case I fished around about 6 or 7 foot deep, shallower swim on what is quite a deep pond, and in the other case I fished about 11 foot of water, and it definitely works. I won't say I never miss a bite. On the second session in the deep water missed quite a few bites, but I think what was happening is that there seemed to be some very small perch, little tiny perch around. I was picking up the odd one of these that sort of just nip the end of the maggot. They don't show a chewed maggot or anything, and you get a lovely bite and there's nothing there, and I think that was the perch. On the first session in the shallower water I had no perch at all, and I hit pretty much every bite. They're roach bites, and I had roach to a pound in both sessions, mostly around 3 to 6 ounces. Now I tend to swing fish in even on 22 hooks when I'm not in a match, anything up to 5 or 6 ounces. And then I noticed something. This elastic on a fairly will stretch, so you wind the float up to a certain point and you know the rod's going to bend over, and of course as the fish lifts out of the water the elastic is stretching, so the rod's bending but the elastic's stretching more. They'll fall into pieces, and therefore the fish ended up lower down, up to a foot or so lower down than you would expect. So that's a little side effect, if you like. Doesn't matter when you're netting fish. Playing the fish, you felt, because of the way pole elastic works, it definitely absorbs some of the thumps, plays the fish out a little bit more efficiently. Anyone who's done any amount of pole fishing, I've done a huge amount over the years, knows this. They know that effect of that absorption that comes from the pole elastic. I'm going to keep this video fairly brief. Definitely worth a go. Somewhere where you're not catching big fish, not expecting carp or big tench or snags and things. If you're sort of fishing on the drop and want to fish with some extra finesse, that extra length, what you might call a cast below the elastic, that will give you more finesse there, that bit of extra shock absorption. So give it a go. Start off by taking the elastic off the end, tie a neat little loop on one end, measure down so you're going to get another loop, so it's about 4 or 5, no more than 6 inches. Make another loop, trim it off, and there's your loop, and you can just tie that into your rig. One bit of fishing I may try this with come next summer is when I'm hemp and tear fishing on the Stour, when I'm fishing right up in the water, fishing about 3 or 4 foot deep. In this case the elastic's going to be right under the float, but quite often you're okay hitting the smaller roach, but sometimes you'll hit a much bigger roach, and where you're fishing quite shallow it's very direct, and even though I'm using really top class rods like a Titan 2000, it's easy to bump those fish fishing a fairly fine wire hook, very fine wire hook. So there's something I will try out again come next summer. Until then, keep catching, keep thinking, and for now it's goodbye from me.